Okay, snow dayers. So, what we're doing in this lecture is half of this topic here. We're going to talk about Athens first, and then in the next video, we'll do Sparta and the war between these two ideologically opposed city-states. Athens on the one hand, which we meet today, Sparta on the other hand. Now, the last time, we were fighting wars against the Persians. And those wars are successful. The Greeks are not conquered by the armies of Darius or Xerxes, and this allows breathing space for an intellectual development in all of these cities, but especially in Athens. A mental and intellectual, really, revolution. And we're going to start with an historian who wrote about the Persian Wars, arguably the first historian, name of Herodotus. There he is right there. He has in many ways, a very modern understanding of what writing history is. In his two great works, The Persian Wars, which is about the Persian Wars, and his other great, even larger work, The Histories. Now, we had excerpts from these, from the description of the Persians, the description of the Battle of Thermopylae. For him, as for modern historians, as for you when you write your essays, primary source evidence. How do you support what you are arguing? That was the primary, no pun intended, point of emphasis for him. And the term history is actually derived from a Greek term, historiai, which means inquiries or researches, investigations, if you will. He travels around the Mediterranean. He interviews people. He's not really an adult during the Persian Wars. He's born somewhere around 44 BC. But he interviews the survivors, the veterans. He travels to Egypt, investigates that 3,000-year-old culture. But he also has a view of history that is decidedly unmodern. That his researches, his historiae, should help to make people better, for lack of a better term. And he's also known as the father of lies. Because in his estimation, his work, and works like his, should be instructive. They should be didactic, which means they should teach you a lesson. And if, in order to teach that lesson, the facts had to be massaged or fabricated, well, then so be it. And so, for example, in that excerpt on the Persians, it is very polemical. It's very political. It's meant to make a contrast between the culture of the Greeks and the supposed lack of culture of the Persians. How they make decisions when they're drunk, and these kind of very seemingly barbaric qualities. The reality is none of that's true. But it helps to serve his purpose in his histories, in his researches, to show that the Greeks won because they have a superior culture, that they are more enlightened, as opposed to the Persians. The fact of the matter is, the Persian culture was at least, if not more advanced than the Greeks at the same time. But that doesn't help explain why the Greeks won. If the Greeks won because of their superior culture, the Persians then, by definition, need to have an inferior culture. So that's Herodotus. And so he's a problematic figure. On the one hand, he has some very modern techniques. On the other hand, he is not called the father of lies for no reason. I want to turn now to another Greek, actually from Athens. Herodotus is from what is modern-day Turkey, those Greek cities that had revolted against Persian rule in the 490s and had resulted in the First Persian War in the first place. Socrates, on the other hand, this guy, cuts quite the figure, is Athenian. And he is really the godfather of philosophy. For him, the unexamined life, that is, accepting the world for what it is and accepting your life and why you do things as a given, is a failure. That you need to ask a very simple question about everything. It's 3 letters. W-H-Y. Why? Why are we doing this? Why is this happening in this way? Why do I do this? He would argue that the ultimate good in life is intellectual development, and that the pursuit of material possessions, worldly goods, is a waste of time. In fact, it gets in the way of that intellectual development. So, in some ways, reminiscent of Lao Tzu, reminiscent of Siddhartha, the Buddha, reminiscent of Mahavira, but from a different perspective. He doesn't really have a job. He spends most of his time hanging out in the main public square in Athens called the Agora. He bothers people. He forces them to question their preconceived notions. So what his day consists of is hanging out in the Agora, A-G-O-R-A, the big open space. Agoraphobia, fear of open spaces, comes from this term. And bothering people. Asking them tough questions. Questions that don't have easy answers. And this is what we will come to call the Socratic method, which is teaching not by telling you, the students, things, but by asking you questions, forcing you to come to the conclusions that we would otherwise, as teachers, simply tell you. It's how a lot of law schools operate, on the Socratic method. He has a circle of disciples around him, in some ways like the Buddha. One of those disciples is Plato, you've probably heard of. Talk about in a second. But he causes problems, especially problems in light of this massive generation-long war that's fought between Athens and Sparta, the Peloponnesian War. And in 399 BC, he will be accused of corrupting the youth of Athens and of atheism, not respecting the traditional gods. He is found guilty, and he is required to commit suicide by drinking poison in the form of hemlock. His death does not bring an end to his message. In many ways, he is a martyr. And his message of questioning life, asking why, living an examined life, will reach flower in his greatest disciple, this guy here, Plato. Born in the early years of the Peloponnesian War, something we'll talk about in the next video, he, at a very young age, becomes enamored with Socrates' teaching. Follows him everywhere. Just totally distraught when he is convicted and forced to commit suicide. And he will make it his life's mission to keep alive Socrates' message. And he'll keep that message alive through founding really the prototype for Western educational institutions, something called the Academy, in 385 BC. This will be really a kind of prototype university, and will have a great influence in later Western European educational developments. And we have a piece of primary source evidence written by Plato. It's in the form of a dialogue. Plato writes lots of dialogues where two people are talking back and forth. And one of the people is always Socrates, his teacher, his mentor. And in this excerpt from Plato's text called The Republic, it's a story about a cave. It's a story about how this cave is in many ways a kind of metaphor for the human condition. So at this point, in the video, if you haven't read already, The Allegory of the Cave by Plato, pause the video and read this. To help guide your reading, this is an attempt to describe how someone living the unexamined life can be changed. So pause the video now. Read this. Okay. Hope you enjoyed that. I find this a fascinating document. Written in Plato's later life, somewhere maybe in the 360s. We don't have exact dates for a lot of this stuff. So, middle of the 4th century, the 300s BC. This talks about how the average person is like a prisoner in a cave with their back to the cave mouth. And reality for them is the shadows of what is passing in front of that cave mouth. And this is because they're not asking why. But if you take that person and you bring them out of the cave and you show them the reality of the world, they will initially be very miserable. They'll be in pain. They'll, in many ways, want to go back into that cave. And so what Plato, through Socrates, is saying here is that asking hard questions is difficult. It's much easier to go through life oblivious to the realities of the world. But that's a waste of your life. Because remember, these Greeks view this life as the end and the beginning. There's really nothing beyond this world. As we get to Christianity, we'll see a kind of wild reinterpretation of that. Or so with the Egyptians. This world's a way station to the eternal afterlife. For the Greeks, this is life. This life we are living is really it. And you need to make the most of it. And if you live in a cave, a metaphorical cave, and you have your back to the reality of the world, then you are wasting your one shot at living. Heavy stuff. Allegory of the Cave. Love it. Important piece of primary source evidence. Speaks to the philosophical development here in Athens in the decades after the Persian Wars. So these Persian Wars, which we talked about in the last actual class we had, will result in Athens being a superpower. Athens being a superpower because of that navy. That navy built by Themistocles in the 480s, built with money from the silver mines that are discovered after the Battle of Marathon at Laurion. A navy that is most powerful in the Mediterranean. And Athens will use this power to create a defensive organization alliance known as the Delian League, because it's headquartered at the island of Delos. It's kind of like NATO, the North American Treaty Organization that's formed after World War II by the United States to prevent an invasion from the Soviet Union. The Delian League's mission is to prevent a third Persian War, or at least be prepared in the event of a third Persian War. Most of the Greek cities around the Mediterranean, the Eastern Mediterranean, the Aegean, will join this league. Here's a map. Everything in pink or red are Delian League cities, so the entire Aegean coast of the Persian Empire joins up. These cities that had revolted in the 490s, leading to the First Persian War, and lots of these small island states in the Aegean. Each of these cities were required to either contribute ships or money or both to this league, and the treasury of the Delian League will become quite large. There's a lot of money. And in 454 BC, that treasury is moved from the island of Delos to Athens. And the Athenians will spend the money. And the person really responsible for this this theft of the Delian League money, there's really no reason to really beat around the bush. The Athenians steal the money. Is this guy here, Pericles. Born a few years before the Persian Wars, he comes of age in the time in which Athens is this superpower. And we're going to look at Pericles in terms of two elements of his life and personality. On the one hand, his vast expansion of access to the political system in Athens. That's the one. Expansion of democracy. And the other, his building program. Using that Delian League money to rebuild Athens. Because Athens had been destroyed and burned by the Persians in 480 when they evacuated the city. Pericles will use this Delian League money to rebuild Athens in imperial glory. So let's first look at the democracy stuff. Prior to Pericles, you had to have some property and money to take part in the democracy. Not a huge amount, but you couldn't be destitute to serve, to take part in the assembly, in Greek, the ecclesia. And this term will be appropriated by Christians to describe their meeting places in the 1st and 2nd centuries AD. But again, that's for down the road. This assembly, this ecclesia, under Pericles, is opened up to all free, non-slave men. Initially over 30, later over 18 years old. And this is the core of the Athenian government. Everybody votes on everything. Well, not everybody, not slaves, and not women. But every white, well, they're all white. So I've been doing the AP US history class, and there's a lot of race things in there. Every non-slave male over 18 can take part. So this is a vast expansion of the democracy, of participation in the democracy in Athens. There's also a kind of executive council, but it's huge. There's no one person in charge in Athens. Pericles is a dominant political figure, but he has to have the support of hundreds, if not thousands, of people to get things done. But there is a kind of executive council called the Bulla, which is made up of 500 people, which is in charge of carrying out the laws passed by the assembly. And you are chosen randomly to serve in the Bulla. And you only serve for 35 days, about a month. This is to prevent power being, what's the word I'm looking for? Power being consolidated in the hands of one person. So you've got the ecclesia, the assembly, the Bulla, the executive, but a very diffused executive power. You also have a justice system that is powered by this democracy. When you're accused of a crime, you are tried by a jury of 201 people who sit in the ecclesia. You get paid for your jury duty time. And what this does is allows people who couldn't afford to take a week or 2 weeks off of work to serve on a jury to be on the jury, because they'll get paid in lieu of doing their regular job. It's a very enlightened system of justice and the way in which the accused are tried. Very, in many ways, modern system. Paid jurors, 201. There's 201, so there can't be a tie vote. If there were 200, you could have 100 to 100 tie vote. The last element of the Athenian democracy under Pericles is a little strange, but it does make sense. If one person started to become too powerful, the Athenian men could vote to exile that person for 10 years through a process called ostracism. And it comes from the name for a shard of pottery. Remember, they don't have paper, so their scratch pads, their post-it notes, take the form of broken vases, of shards of pottery, known as ostraca. And you would scribble or scratch the name of the person you're trying to exile on that, and if the majority of the ecclesia voted to kick you out, then, just like in Survivor, you're off the island for 10 years. Ironically, one of the most notable people to be ostracized is Themistocles, the man who had lobbied to build the fleet in the 480s, who had been the architect of the victory at Salamis over the Persians in 480, is exiled from Athens for 10 years. And ironically, too, he ends up in Persia. Small world, huh? So this is the democratic system of Athens. It is truly unique. Often people misuse the word unique. It literally means there's only one of it, and this is certainly true of this system of government. It doesn't exist anywhere else. And it really will not exist anywhere else. Again, the closest kind of parallel to it will be in colonial America in New England in the town hall assemblies. Because our government certainly doesn't operate like this. We are a representative democracy, not a direct democracy. This is every single decision, every adult male votes on it. This system of government is celebrated by Pericles in one of the most I've quoted and referred to funeral eulogies ever given in the ancient world. In the year 430, Athens and Sparta have been fighting a brutal war for a year. It's a war that will last for another 25 years. And there's a great state funeral for the Athenians who've died in the first year of the war. And Pericles, as the mover and shaker of Athens, the person who will actually see, lobbies for the war. It's not a defensive war fought by the Athenians. It's an offensive war fought against Sparta. He delivers this eulogy. And the text we have, it's not written down by Pericles. It's written down by another historian named Thucydides, who's a much more modern historian than his predecessor Herodotus. He's alive during the Peloponnesian War, and he writes this definitive history of it. He's much more responsible in terms of sources and of not making things up. That said, one thing Thucydides does a lot is have people give speeches. Now, he claims that he has either gone and interviewed them or interviewed people who were there. Thucydides is actually at this funeral in 430 and quote-unquote transcribes what Pericles said. It's problematic. It's oral history. But we'll take it as a given that Pericles probably said something like this. So, if you haven't read it yet, pause the video and read the funeral oration by Pericles as recorded by Thucydides. Okay. This is an elegant document. In it, Pericles allegedly says that our Constitution favors the many instead of the few, provides equal justice for all. Class considerations are not allowed to interfere with merit, nor again does poverty bar the way. If a man is able to serve the state, he is not hindered by the obscurity of his condition, reflecting this broadening of the democracy undertaken by Pericles, opening it up to everyone who is over 18 years old, every man who is over 18 years old, and having paid jury duty so even the poorest could afford to take time off work in order to serve on the jury. He also in here talks about the openness of Athenian society. That people from other parts of the world are allowed to come and go to Athens. Athens' power and wealth comes through its trading networks. And so it's a very cosmopolitan city. It's a city in some ways like one that we will see much later in this class, the city of Venice, where differences of ethnicity and nationality are tolerated in no small part in the name of commerce, be it here in Athens or in 14th or 15th century Venice. So this is an important piece of primary source evidence that speaks to the expansion of democracy under Pericles in the middle of the 400s, in the middle of the 5th century BC, and is also important because it's a document from the very first year of the Peloponnesian War, a war that, as we'll see in the next video, completely destroys the Athenian Empire that had been built up so assiduously in the decades after the Persian Wars. So that's Athens and Pericles and the expansion of democracy. But Pericles is also a builder. And he's got this vast treasury of the Delian League to raid. Now this, you might recognize, this is the Acropolis, the high city, literally, in Greek. Acro is high, polis, city, and so an acrobat is somebody that does things high up in the air. Pericles will use this Acropolis as a stage on which to demonstrate Athenian power. And he'll build a great temple. A temple to the patron goddess of the city of Athens, Athena. We call it the Parthenon because it is a temple to Athena Parthenos, Athena the Virgin. And this is what the Acropolis would have looked like in Pericles' day. And you'll notice that the temples are not just white. They're very much painted. The Greeks painted their statues, they painted their temples. They would be rather shocked to see their ruins bereft of paint. And so the Parthenon is actually fairly garishly painted. It doesn't look in Pericles' day as it will later look with just the white, undecorated marble. And as we already talked about with Greek religion, the average person wouldn't go into this temple. People who could go into these temples, like the Parthenon, are the priests or the high-ranking people. It's not the average person. It's a small number, small group. You would gather outside of the temple for the big ceremonies that generally involve sacrificing an animal, letting out its blood and burning the flesh as an offering to the god, in this case to Athena. But if you were allowed to go inside, this is what you would see. A gigantic gilded statue of Athena. Get a sense of the scale. There's a guy, there's a statue. And significantly, she has the hoplite spear and the hoplite shield, the hoplon. But most people would never see this. What they would see, though, on the outside, right along the roof line, on top of the columns, is a frieze. Let me write that out for you. Right there. A frieze. And in this case, the frieze is a procession of Athenians, of average citizens. And so it's in some ways a very democratic piece of art on this great temple that celebrates the patron goddess of the city. All of the people of Athens are represented, and their bas-reliefs, they stand out from the background, and they originally would have all been painted. But this is not what the Parthenon looks like today. This is what the Parthenon looks like today. The paint's all gone, and it's largely a ruin. And what we're going to watch now is a kind of time-lapse video that takes us through the history of this building, from its construction in the middle of the 5th century to its destruction, in no small part, by the Venetians at the end of the 17th century. So this is what the Acropolis would have looked like in Pericles' day. Rather garishly decorated. And at the top is the temple to Athena Parthenos, the Parthenon. And you can see the frieze is along the top here. Its first great tragedy happens about 600 years after it's built, when Germanic barbarians who have raided the Roman Empire largely burn it to the ground. In the middle of the 4th century, it's restored by the last non-Christian emperor of the Roman Empire, a guy named Julian. However, he is the last non-Christian emperor, and Christians view a lot of the pre-Christian world as demonic, and so they like to destroy the statues and the paintings and the texts written by non-pre-Christians, and so the Parthenon is turned into a church. The Church of Santa Sophia, or the Holy Wisdom. And it allows most of the building to survive despite having been many of the carvings along the porticos, or the pediments and the friezes being destroyed. It's turned into a Catholic church during the Crusades when the Franks occupy Athens. It's known as Notre Dame, Our Lady of Athens, so it's dedicated to the Virgin Mary, which is ironic because the original temple was dedicated to the Virgin Athena. However, the Ottoman Turks, who we'll meet later on in this class, conquer Greece and will rule it until the early 1800s, and they turn the building into a mosque. And in a war between Venice and the Turks at the end of the 1600s, well, yeah, that happened. Because the mosque had been the main gunpowder storage center for the Turkish army in Athens. And, yeah, not much left of it. Many of the remaining sculptures will be plundered by the British in the 1800s when they essentially ruled this place as a colony. And this is what it looks like if you go to visit it today. It's a very sad shell of its former self. Now, I've told you when I was in college, I studied abroad for a year at the University of Bologna. The summer after that year at the University of Bologna, I traveled around the Greek islands. And yes, in fact, I did go to the Acropolis and to the Parthenon. And so this is what a 21-year-old Dr. Alexander looked like. The year is 1998. Many of you were not alive. In fact, I would wager none of you were alive, but I was alive, and I was 21, and this is what I looked like. A lot thinner, a scant 18 plus years ago, 17 years ago, but here's the Acropolis. I'm doing a lot of restoration work. They're always doing restoration work. And that's, ta-da, Dr. Alexander. Some of you had heard that this photo was shown in the one class that actually got to have this class live, and were concerned that it would not make an appearance in the video, but hopefully your concerns have now been allayed because, ta-da, there I am. Now you can see a full-scale replica of the Parthenon today. And you don't even have to go to Greece. You just have to go to Nashville, Tennessee. This is about 4 blocks away from the Vanderbilt campus. It was built in 1895 for the centennial celebration of the state of Tennessee. And it is a full-scale replica of the Parthenon. And that statue of Athena I showed you earlier, with the modern guy standing next to her, is actually inside this reconstruction. So if you want to see what it would have looked like in its day, you can go to Nashville, Tennessee, and see the Parthenon. Okay, so that is the first half of this tale of two cities. The next video will talk about the Spartans. So read Spartan Discipline for Youths by Plutarch, written about 100 AD, and read Sparta Builds a Military State, pages 129 to 131. And we'll also then get into the Peloponnesian War, which is talked about in like the late 130s, like 138 to 141. So the next video will be Sparta, they're the antithesis to Athens, and the epic war that they fight between 431 and 404 BC that results in the destruction, really the permanent destruction of Athenian military power. So, Spartan Discipline for Youths, some textbook pages.